My name is Linda Parker, and I was 58 years old when my daughter looked into my eyes and called me a failure. I still remember that afternoon. I remember the cold coffee on the kitchen table. I remember the sound of the old refrigerator behind me. Most of all, I remember my daughter's face. Emily was standing near the door of my little apartment. She was 29 years old. She wore a beautiful coat, expensive shoes, and a small gold necklace. I looked at her and smiled. "Emily, you came early. I was just making coffee." She did not smile back. "Mom, we need to talk." I knew that voice. Something was wrong. I pulled out a chair for her. She did not sit. Instead, she looked around my apartment. The old sofa, the small dining table, the curtains I had bought almost 15 years ago, my little television. Then she looked back at me. "Do you still live like this?" I felt a strange pain in my chest. "This is home," I said softly. Emily crossed her arms. "Mom, sometimes I don't understand you." I tried to laugh. "Understand what?" "You work all the time. You save every dollar. You never buy anything nice. You still drive that old car. You live in this tiny apartment." She stopped. Then she said the words that stayed inside my heart for a very long time. "You are a failure, Mom." The room became completely silent. I looked at her. For a few seconds, I could not speak. I wanted to ask her to repeat it. I wanted to get angry. I wanted to remind her of everything I had done, but I did not. I just looked down at my hands. My hands were old. The skin was dry. There were small marks on my fingers from years of hard work. I had used those hands to cook for her. I had used those hands to wash her clothes. I had used those hands to hold her when she cried. And now those same hands were shaking under the table. Emily continued, "Do you know what it feels like when my friends ask about you?" I slowly looked up. "What do you tell them?" "That you're just struggling." Her voice became softer, but somehow that hurt more. I don't want to be ashamed of my own mother. My heart broke, but I still said, "I'm sorry you feel that way." She looked surprised. Maybe she expected me to fight. Maybe she expected me to cry. Instead, I stood up and went to the kitchen. "Would you like some coffee?" "No." She grabbed her bag. "I should go." I nodded. At the door, she turned around. "Mom, I just want you to have a better life." I almost smiled. Because she did not know. She did not know how hard I had worked to give her a better life. She did not know how many nights I had gone to bed hungry because there was not enough money for dinner after I paid her school expenses. She did not know about the winter when our heater broke and I used every extra dollar to buy her a warm coat. She did not know that after her father, Mark, died, I was only 32 years old. I had no savings. I had no plan. I had a little girl who called me Mommy and believed I could fix everything. So I learned to fix everything. Or at least, I tried. After Emily left, I stood alone in the kitchen. I heard her car start outside. Then it disappeared down the street. I waited until I could no longer hear it. Then I sat on the floor. And I cried. Not because she had called me a failure. I cried because, for the first time, I wondered if she really believed it. Later that night, I opened the small drawer beside my bed. Inside was an old metal box. I took it out and placed it on the bed. I opened it slowly. There was an old photograph of Emily. She was 10 years old. She had 2 little ponytails and a huge smile. In the photograph, she was standing in front of a beautiful white house with a wide porch. I remembered that day. She had pointed at that house and said, "Mommy, when I grow up, I'm going to have a house just like this." I had laughed. "You can have any house you want, sweetheart." She had hugged me. I closed my eyes. Then I looked at the papers inside the box. My savings records, an old property document, and a small notebook filled with numbers. I touched the photograph. My voice was barely a whisper. "One day, Emily." I smiled through my tears. "One day, sweetheart, you'll understand why I never gave up." I closed the box. I had never told my daughter what I was really doing, and she had no idea that the biggest surprise of her life had already begun. The next morning, I woke up before sunrise. For a few seconds, I forgot what had happened. Then I remembered Emily's words. "You are a failure, Mom." I stared at the ceiling. My eyes were tired from crying, but I got out of bed. I made a simple breakfast, toast and coffee. Then I put on my old blue work shirt and left the apartment. I had work at 7. That was my life. Wake up, work, pay bills, save money, go home, do it again. I had lived that way for years, and I was used to it. After Mark died, I had learned something very quickly. When you are raising a child alone, you cannot stop because you are tired. You cannot say, "I can't do this." You just keep going. I worked at a small medical office during the day. In the evenings, I cleaned 2 offices downtown. Sometimes my back hurt so badly that I could barely climb the stairs to my apartment. But I never told Emily. When she called, I always said the same thing. "I'm fine, honey." Even when I wasn't, even when I was exhausted, even when I had only $20 left in my bank account, I still said, "I'm fine." Because mothers are good at hiding pain. A few weeks after our argument, Emily called me. "Mom?" "Hi, sweetheart." There was a long silence. "I found a house." I smiled. "A house?" "Yes. Jason and I have been looking." I sat down at my kitchen table. "That's wonderful." It has a big kitchen, 3 bedrooms, and a porch. I knew that porch. I had seen the pictures. It was exactly the kind of house Emily had always dreamed about. "How much is it?" I asked. There was another silence. Then she told me. My heart sank. It was far more than she could afford. "Oh," I said. "Yeah." Her voice sounded disappointed. "We probably can't get it." I looked across my little kitchen. There was an old calendar hanging on the wall. Beside it was a picture of Emily when she graduated from college. I stared at that picture for a long moment. Then I asked, "Do you really love the house?" "Yes, Mom." "Then don't give up yet." She laughed softly. "Mom, it's too expensive." Sometimes things seem impossible before we try. I could hear the smile in her voice, You always say that. Yes, I said, because it's true. After we hung up, I opened my metal box. I took out my notebook. I had been saving for years, little by little, $10, $50, $100, whatever I could save. I had never told Emily about it. But now I knew what I had to do. I started making a list. My retirement savings, my emergency money, the small property my parents had left me, my old jewelry, everything. I knew what it meant. If I helped Emily buy that house, I would have very little left for myself. Maybe almost nothing. But I was not thinking about myself. I was thinking about the little girl in the old photograph. The girl who once stood on that porch and said, "Mommy, I want a house like this." 2 months later, I sold the small property my parents had left me. It hurt. That land had belonged to my family for years. But I signed the papers anyway. The money went into my bank account. Then I sold a gold bracelet Mark had given me before we got married. I held it in my hand before giving it to the jeweler. For a moment, I wanted to cry. It was one of the few things I still had from him. But I remembered Emily's face, so I let it go. I also kept driving my old car. I stopped buying new clothes. I stopped eating at restaurants. I even canceled my small vacation that I had planned for the summer. Every dollar mattered. Every sacrifice mattered. But there was one thing I still didn't know. Would I have enough? One Saturday morning, I saw the house again. I stood across the street and looked at it. White walls, blue front door, wide porch, small garden. It looked peaceful. It looked like a home. I whispered, "This is the one." Then I walked into the real estate office. The agent showed me the papers. I looked at the final price. My hands began to shake. It would take almost everything I had. The agent looked at me carefully. "Mrs. Parker, are you sure?" I thought about Emily. I thought about Mark. I thought about all the years I had worked. Then I smiled. Yes. I signed my name, Linda Parker. The house was now mine. But it was not really for me. It was for the daughter who thought I had failed her. I looked at the keys in my hand. For the first time in many years, I allowed myself to smile. Emily thought her mother had never been able to give her anything. Soon she would discover the truth. And I had a feeling that the truth would change both of our lives forever. For the next few weeks, I worked on the house in secret. Every morning before work, I stopped by the property. I wanted everything to be ready before Emily saw it. The house was beautiful, but it still felt empty. So I slowly filled it with things I knew she would love. I bought a comfortable sofa for the living room. I found a large wooden table for the kitchen. I chose soft curtains for the bedrooms. I put small flowers on the porch. I even bought a simple coffee machine because Emily loved coffee in the mornings. Every little thing made me think about her. Sometimes I would stand in the middle of the living room and imagine her walking through the front door. I imagined her smile. I imagined her looking around and saying, "Mom, this is beautiful." Then I would smile too. But sometimes when I was alone, I felt something else. Fear. I had spent almost everything I had on this house. There was not much left for me. My retirement money was smaller now. My old car was still making strange noises. My apartment was still the same, but I told myself it was okay. I had spent my whole life choosing Emily first. This was just another choice. One afternoon, I was standing in the kitchen when I found an old photo inside one of the boxes I had brought from my apartment. It was the photograph of Emily at 10 years old. She was standing in front of a white house. The same kind of house. The same kind of porch. The same kind of dream. I placed the photograph in a beautiful wooden frame. Then I put it on the fireplace. I stepped back and looked at it. "Just wait a little longer, sweetheart," I whispered. A few days later, I called Emily. "Can you come over Saturday morning?" "Why?" "I have something to show you." She laughed. "Mom, that sounds serious." "It isn't bad." "Okay, I'll come." On Saturday morning, I stood outside the house and waited. My hands were cold. I had never been so nervous. A few minutes later, I saw Emily's car turn onto the street. She parked across from the house. She got out wearing jeans, a white sweater, and sunglasses. Then she looked at the house. Her face changed. She stopped walking. "Mom?" I smiled. "Come inside." She slowly walked toward me. "What is this place?" "You'll see." I opened the front door. Emily stepped inside. She looked around. The living room, the kitchen, the stairs, the windows. She touched the kitchen counter. "Mom, this house is beautiful." I smiled. "You like it?" She looked at me. "I love it." Then she walked toward the porch doors. "This looks like the house I showed you." "I know." She turned around. "How do you know?" I did not answer. She walked through the first bedroom, then the second, then the master bedroom. Her eyes became wider with every step. Finally, she came back downstairs. "This place must be really expensive." It was. She looked confused. "Why are we here?" I reached into my purse. I took out a small set of keys. Then I placed them in her hand. She stared at them. "What are these?" "The house keys." She looked at me. Then she looked at the keys again. "Mom!" "It's yours." She did not move. For several seconds, she just stood there. Then she laughed. "No." I smiled. "Yes." "Mom, stop. This isn't funny. I'm not joking." Her eyes filled with tears. "You bought this?" I nodded. "For me?" "Yes." She took one step backward. "How?" I sat down on the sofa. "Come sit with me." She slowly sat beside me. I took a deep breath. "I started saving a long time ago." She looked at me. "Before we even had this argument." Her face became serious. "I remembered something you told me when you were 10. She looked confused. "What?" "You stood in front of a house like this one. You told me that one day you wanted a home with a porch, a big kitchen, and a little garden." Emily covered her mouth. "I never forgot." She began to cry. I reached for her hand. I sold the property your grandparents left me. Her eyes widened. What? I sold some jewelry too. Mom, I used most of my savings. She shook her head. You did all that? I nodded. She looked around the room again. Then she saw the photograph on the fireplace. She slowly stood up. She walked toward it. Her fingers touched the frame. It was her, 10 years old, smiling, standing beside the dream house. She turned toward me with tears running down her face. You kept this? Of course. She walked back to me. Mom, She stopped. She could not finish. I looked into her eyes. You once told me I was a failure. Her face fell. I remember. I wasn't angry. She started crying harder. I was just sad that you thought my life had no value. She shook her head. No, Mom, I was wrong. I gently held her hands. I didn't buy this house to prove that I am a good mother. She looked at me. I bought it because I remembered your dream. She cried quietly. Then she whispered the words I had waited years to hear. Mom, I'm sorry. For a moment, I wanted to say everything I had kept inside. All the nights I had cried, all the sacrifices, all the times I had felt invisible. But when I looked at my daughter, I only saw the little girl from the photograph. So I opened my arms, and she fell into them. We held each other in the middle of the house she had always dreamed about, the house I had spent my life trying to give her. But neither of us knew that the biggest surprise was still waiting for us. Emily stayed in my arms for a long time. Neither of us said anything. I could feel her tears on my shoulder. She was no longer the confident woman who had stood in my old apartment and called me a failure. She was my little girl again. The little girl who used to sleep beside me when she was afraid of thunderstorms. The little girl who held my hand when Mark died. The little girl who once told me that I was the strongest mother in the world. I pulled away gently and looked at her. Are you okay? She wiped her tears. No, Mom. I smiled softly. Why? Because I don't know how I became this person. I sat beside her. What person? The person who thought money was more important than you. I stayed quiet. Emily looked around the beautiful room. I thought you were failing because you didn't have a big house. I thought you were failing because you drove an old car. I thought you were failing because you couldn't give me the things other people had. She looked at me. But I never asked what you gave up. I reached for her hand. You were young. That doesn't excuse it. She shook her head. I said something terrible to you. I nodded. You did. She looked down. Did you hate me? No. Were you angry? For a little while. She gave a small, sad smile. Do you still remember what I said? I looked at her. Every word. Her eyes filled with tears again. I wish I could take it back. You can't. She nodded. I know. I squeezed her hand. But you can learn from it. She looked at me carefully. What did you learn? I thought about that question for a moment. Then I answered. I learned that sometimes we can love someone so much that we forget to tell them how much they mean to us. Emily looked surprised. What do you mean? I worked. I saved. I worried. I sacrificed. I thought you would understand someday. I smiled sadly. But I should have talked to you more. She leaned against my shoulder. And I should have listened. We sat together quietly. Then Emily asked, Mom, what are you going to do now? I knew exactly what she meant. She was asking about my money, about my savings, about my future. So I told her the truth. I don't have much left. She immediately sat up. What? I used most of my savings for this house. Her face changed. No. Emily. No, Mom. You can't do that. She stood up. You need your money. You need your retirement. I smiled. I know. Then why did you give me everything? I looked at her. Because I wanted to give you a home. She shook her head. But I don't want a house if it means you have nothing. That sentence touched my heart more than anything else that day. I stood up and hugged her. You see? She looked at me. See what? You finally understand. She began to cry again. I held her close. Your father and I used to dream about giving you a good life. When he died, I thought that dream had died too. I looked toward the photograph on the fireplace. But I kept going. Emily whispered, Why? Because you gave me a reason. She took my hand. You were never a failure. I smiled. I know that now. She laughed through her tears. You don't sound very sad. I've had a lot of practice. She smiled. Then she looked at the house again. I don't think I can accept this. You don't have to. She looked confused. What? I bought the house for you, but there is one condition. What condition? I pointed toward the kitchen. You have to let me come over for Sunday dinner. Emily laughed. That's it? And you have to call me more. Deal. And when I get old, you don't put me in some terrible nursing home. She laughed so hard that tears came from her eyes. I would never. We spent the rest of the day in the house. We cooked together. We opened boxes. We talked about old memories. And for the first time in years, it felt like we were mother and daughter again. Before I left that evening, Emily walked me to the front door. She hugged me tightly. Then she whispered, Mom, I thought this house was your biggest gift to me. I looked at her. What was it then? She smiled. You! I could not stop my tears. She kissed my cheek. I finally understand. As I walked toward my old car, I looked back at the house. The white walls, the blue door, the wide porch, the little garden. It was beautiful. But I realized something. The house had never been the real gift. The real gift was forgiveness. The real gift was understanding. The real gift was having my daughter back. My daughter once called me a failure. Years later, she stood on the porch of her dream house and held my hand. She finally understood what I had known all along. A person's worth is not measured by the size of their house, the car they drive, or the money in their bank account. Sometimes the person who looks like they have the least has actually given the most. And sometimes the greatest success in life is very simple. It is loving someone so deeply that you never give up on them. I drove home that night with tears in my eyes and a smile on my face. For the first time in many years, I did not feel like a woman who had lost almost everything. I felt like a mother who had finally found her daughter again.